Imagine, if you dare, a silence so absolute it claws at your eardrums, a void where even the wind holds its breath. Not the tranquil hush of a snow-laden forest, nor the peaceful lull of a starlit desert. No, this is a silence born of unimaginable horror, a silence pregnant with the screams that can no longer be uttered. Picture it, a vast expanse, stretching as far as the eye can see, devoid of verdant life, innocent wildflowers, or even the humblest blade of grass. Only the parched earth, and, rising from it, like a ghastly parody of a forest, an ocean of sharpened stakes, each one a brutal punctuation mark in a sentence written in blood and despair. And skewered upon these grotesque totems, a tapestry woven of human suffering. Tens of thousands of corpses, men, women, children, their silent agony painting a landscape of unspeakable dread. This is not the fevered imagining of a morbid fantasist. This, shockingly, is history, etched into the annals of 1462, when the iron-fisted Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, dared to venture into the turbulent, blood-soaked lands of Wallachia. He anticipated resistance, a clash of steel, the thunder of war horses, perhaps even a protracted siege. He did not expect to find hell itself unleashed upon the mortal realm. The air, thick and cloying, carried the stench of decay, a pungent blend of putrefaction and dried blood that clung to the throat like a shroud. It was a smell that whispered of unimaginable suffering, of lives extinguished in the most agonizing manner imaginable. A stench that promised no quarter, no mercy, only the cold embrace of oblivion. And presiding over this macabre tableau, the architect of this unspeakable horror was no raving madman, no bloodthirsty beast driven by mindless rage. He was, instead, chillingly lucid, calculating, a master strategist wielding death itself as his most potent weapon. Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia, known to history as Vlad the Impaler, or, in the hushed whispers of his enemies, Dracula. Prepare yourself, for we are not merely recounting a story of barbaric cruelty. We are embarking on a journey into the darkest recesses of the human heart, a descent into the abyss where power and terror intertwine, and where the line between sanity and madness blurs into indistinguishable shades of crimson. We will traverse the sun-baked sands of Ottoman Egypt, where impalement was a commonplace spectacle. We will venture into the lush emerald depths of colonial Suriname, where iron hooks replaced wooden stakes in a grotesque evolution of torture. And we will confront the dehumanizing horrors of World War II prison camps, where bamboo shoots transformed into instruments of slow, agonizing death. Each stake, each agonizing scream silenced by death, represents an incision into the collective memory of humanity, a scar that refuses to heal. And Vlad, far from being a mere monster, was a shrewd, almost unnervingly intelligent ruler who grasped a fundamental truth about power. Fear, expertly cultivated and brutally applied, can be more effective than any army, any weapon, any fortress. It can shatter empires, cripple rebellions, and leave an indelible mark on the soul of a nation. Death is the artist, and I am his canvas, Vlad allegedly proclaimed. A chilling testament to his warped vision of justice and his unshakable belief in the power of terror. He did not kill indiscriminately. Each impalement was a carefully orchestrated act of psychological warfare, designed to instill absolute fear in the hearts of his enemies and to enforce unwavering obedience among his own people. The height of the stakes, the positioning of the bodies, the methods of torture, all were meticulously planned to maximize the impact of this gruesome spectacle. Some stakes bore entire families, a mother and child forever bound together in death. Others held victims impaled upside down, their bodies grotesquely contorted in a final, agonizing mockery of life. Still others were pierced from mouth to skull, their silent screams echoing across the desolate landscape. One Ottoman soldier, his face pale and etched with horror, recounted a scene that would forever haunt his waking hours. "I saw a child, no older than 5, still squirming, skewered through its mother's body. Its eyes, wide and unblinking, stared at me, accusing, unforgiving." The horror was compounded by Vlad's meticulous attention to detail. He did not use sharp stakes, designed for a swift death. Instead, he employed thick, blunt poles, greased with lard, to ensure a slow, agonizing penetration. The victim, bound and helpless, was placed face down, and the stake was inserted with agonizing slowness through the anus or vagina, depending on their gender. The executioner, with chilling precision, would maneuver the stake to avoid vital organs, prolonging the victim's suffering for days. If executed correctly, the victim would remain conscious, their brain agonizingly aware of every agonizing moment, their eyes wide open, their bodies racked with spasms of pain. When the tip of the stake reached the shoulder bone or neck, the executioner would deliver a final brutal blow with a mallet, the sound of bone cracking echoing across the killing field like a death knell. Then the body would be erected, left to hang in the sun, its own weight driving the stake deeper into its flesh with each agonizing breath. Death was not swift, not merciful, not an end, but a prolonged, agonizing performance, a public spectacle designed to instill terror and obedience. "Blood is ink, corpses are paper. I write history my own way," Vlad is said to have boasted, a chilling declaration of his absolute power and his willingness to use any means necessary to achieve his goals. But Vlad's reign of terror was not confined to his enemies. His own people were equally subject to his brutal brand of justice. In 1457, he hosted a lavish Easter feast, inviting all the Wallachian nobility to his castle, a seemingly generous act that masked a chilling betrayal. The banquet was opulent, filled with music, dancing, and the aroma of roasted meat and wine. But in the midst of the revelry, Vlad rose, his eyes cold and piercing, and raised his glass. "Tell me," he said, his voice cutting through the din, "how many princes have you served?" Some answered 3, some 5. One trembling old man confessed to having served 15. Vlad set down his glass, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "And to which of them were you truly loyal?" Silence descended upon the hall, heavy and suffocating. No one dared to answer. Vlad nodded, his eyes gleaming with predatory satisfaction. "In that case," he declared, "you are loyal to none." Immediately, soldiers stormed into the hall, their swords drawn. The old and weak were impaled on the spot, their blood splattering across the feast tables, their screams mingling with the remnants of the festive music. The survivors were chained and forced to march hundreds of kilometers to a ruined fortress, where they were forced into slave labor until their inevitable deaths. Vlad's message was brutally clear. No one was safe, not the king, not the nobles, not the commoners. Anyone could be the next corpse adorning his ghastly forest. In the eyes of the world, Vlad was a demon, a monster of unimaginable cruelty. But to many Wallachians, he was the last bastion of defense against the encroaching Ottoman Empire, a ruthless but effective leader who was willing to sacrifice anything, even the lives of his own people, to preserve their independence. And he chose to build that wall not with stone or mortar, but with human flesh, a testament to his chilling understanding of the power of fear. The horrifying death at the hands of Vlad III leads many to believe that execution by impalement was the unique legacy of a cold-blooded medieval figure. But the truth is far more terrifying. Impalement did not disappear after Vlad. It merely changed its face. Vlad's death in 1476, his severed head sent to Constantinople as proof of Ottoman victory, did not usher in an era of humanitarian enlightenment. On the contrary, other civilizations, across continents and centuries, continued to wield impalement as a potent tool for social control, brutal punishment, and the psychological terrorization of the masses. The echoes of Vlad's ghastly reign reverberated through history, shaping the practices of empires and colonies alike. One of the most detailed and haunting accounts of impalement comes from the pen of Jean de Vanneau, a French merchant who journeyed through Ottoman-era Egypt in the 17th century. His observations, recorded with a chillingly detached neutrality, offer a glimpse into the systematic and widespread use of this barbaric practice. He meticulously described the procedure of execution by impalement, a process designed to maximize suffering and prolong the victim's agony. The condemned, stripped and humiliated, was forced to lie face down, their hands bound tightly behind their back. A small, precise incision was then made at the anus, a deliberate act of desecration that marked the beginning of their excruciating ordeal. Next, a thick, viscous mixture of turpentine and flour was applied to the wound, a macabre attempt to prevent premature bleeding. The purpose, chillingly pragmatic, was not to alleviate the victim's pain, but to ensure that they did not succumb to blood loss too quickly, thereby shortening the duration of their public suffering. A large wooden stake, sharpened at one end and meticulously oiled, was then slowly, agonizingly inserted into the body. This was not a swift, forceful thrust. Instead, the stake was pushed, inch by agonizing inch, with the aid of a mallet, the rhythmic thud of the wood against flesh echoing across the execution grounds like a morbid drumbeat. Jean de Vanneau recounted witnessing a man executed in this manner who survived for several agonizing hours, his eyes wide with unimaginable pain, his body racked with spasms. He moaned without words, begging passers-by to end his suffering, not in search of mercy, but out of sheer, overwhelming desperation. After enduring hours of public display, suspended between life and death, the executioner would return, delivering the final fatal blow. With a swift, brutal strike of the mallet, they would drive the stake through the victim's neck, severing their spinal cord and bringing a merciful end to their torment. The lifeless corpse was then left hanging on the stake, a gruesome spectacle for all to see, a stark warning to those who dared to defy the authority of the Ottoman Empire. The body remained on display until the stench of decay became unbearable, forcing authorities to remove it for burial. According to Jean de Vanneau, this horrific practice was not an isolated incident, but a standard administrative procedure, routinely applied to rebels, thieves, or anyone who dared to insult or challenge the established order. The message was clear: dissent would not be tolerated, and the consequences for disobedience would be swift, brutal, and unforgettable. And if you believe that such unimaginable cruelty was confined to the ancient societies of the East, the history of colonial Europe will send shivers down your spine. In Suriname, a Dutch colony in South America during the 17th century, impalement evolved into an even more grotesque form of torture, utilizing iron hooks instead of wooden stakes. Here, enslaved Africans, suspected of rebellion or accused of violating the draconian colonial laws, were subjected to a punishment so cruel that it defies comprehension. They were hung by large, sharpened iron hooks, cruelly inserted into their ribs. The hooks were not driven straight through the body. Instead, they were carefully placed to slowly tear the flesh under the relentless force of gravity. Each movement, each labored breath, each desperate attempt to alleviate the agonizing pain caused the hooks to rip further through the flesh, eventually connecting to the bone. Death was a slow, agonizing process, not a sudden release of blood and pain, but a gradual disintegration, layer by agonizing layer. The victims rarely screamed. Their vocal cords were often damaged, their spirits broken. There was only the sound of labored breathing, the sight of wide, unblinking eyes, and the constant stream of tears, dried by the relentless equatorial sun. The use of such a horrific punishment was not simply about inflicting pain. It was about sending a chilling message, a message that needed no words. This is the fate that awaits anyone who dares to resist, anyone who even considers challenging the authority of their enslavers. The image of those bodies, suspended by iron hooks, their flesh slowly tearing away, served as a constant reminder of the absolute power wielded by the Dutch colonists and the utter helplessness of their enslaved population. But the horrors of impalement were not confined to the Middle Ages or the colonial era. The 20th century, often hailed as an age of civilization, justice, and scientific progress, witnessed a bizarre and horrifying revival of this ancient form of torture. During World War II, in some of the brutal Japanese prisoner of war camps scattered throughout Southeast Asia, a particularly cruel and insidious punishment emerged: the bamboo death, also known as takishu. This form of torture was so fiendishly clever that it required almost no active participation from the executioners. Prisoners were tightly tied to the ground, their bodies stretched taut, their limbs immobilized. Beneath them, strategically planted, were freshly sprouted bamboo shoots. As everyone knows, bamboo is one of the fastest-growing plants on Earth, capable of growing several centimeters in just a few agonizing hours. As the bamboo grew, driven by its relentless biological imperative, it pierced upwards from the ground, slowly, inexorably, penetrating the prisoner's body from below. Each breath, each slight movement of the prisoner's body, each surge of growth in the bamboo stalk meant another agonizing puncture of the flesh. The process could last for days, the prisoner enduring unimaginable pain as the bamboo slowly tore through their internal organs. To prolong the agony, the Japanese soldiers would often provide the prisoners with small amounts of water and rice, just enough to prevent them from dying of starvation or thirst. No one beat them, no one interrogated them. Nature itself became the executioner, a silent, relentless force of destruction. The bamboo death was a particularly effective form of psychological torture, designed to break the spirit of the prisoners and instill a sense of utter helplessness. The victim was not being punished by a human being, but the natural world, a force that was indifferent to their suffering and impossible to resist. The knowledge that their death was being brought about by something as seemingly innocuous as a growing plant added another layer of horror to their already unimaginable ordeal. Why does humanity repeatedly resort to this barbaric practice, from one era to the next? Why, from the ancient code of Hammurabi to the reign of Vlad the Impaler, from the Assyrian Empire to the Ottoman Empire, from the colonial plantations of Suriname to the Japanese prison camps of World War II, does impalement always return, in different forms, with the same underlying purpose? The answer likely does not lie in law, nor in justice, but in the raw, brutal exercise of power. Impalement is not simply about killing the body. It is about crushing the will, obliterating memory, and instilling a profound and lasting fear in the hearts of the living. It is not merely the death of an individual, but a living, breathing message to the masses. Look, this is what awaits those who dare to resist, those who dare to challenge the authority of the state.
That is why emperors, kings, military commanders, and colonial rulers have consistently chosen this method, not because it is particularly effective as a form of legal punishment, but because it creates a more profound and lasting trauma than any other form of execution. Because pain, expertly inflicted and publicly displayed, can be transmitted across generations, shaping the collective memory of a society and ensuring the continued obedience of its people. And though we live today in a world that seems, on the surface, to be more civilized, the stories of impalement still lurk silently in history books, in legends, and in the darkest corners of human culture, reminding us that fear has always been a potent tool of power. And humans, when driven by fear, are capable of committing the most unthinkable acts. But every nightmare, every act of unimaginable cruelty begins in one place: the victim's pain. In this chapter, we will not delve into strategic tactics, the machinations of kings, the justifications of executioners, or the depravity of criminals. Instead, we will embark on a far more difficult and disturbing journey, a descent into the interior of the impaled, an attempt to understand, to feel, if we can, what happens inside the mind and body of a human being as life is slowly, agonizingly stripped away, hour by hour, second by second, fiber by fiber. This is not a detached intellectual exercise. It is an attempt to grapple with the raw, visceral reality of unimaginable suffering, not the feeling from a safe distance, but the feeling from within. What happens when a sharpened wooden stake begins to penetrate your body? Contrary to intuition, the initial pain is not as intense as a knife stab or a gunshot wound. It does not strike like lightning, nor explode like a bomb. Instead, it comes on slowly, like a rising tide of icy water, gradually seeping into your bones, numbing your senses, and filling you with a sense of dread. When the stake begins to enter through the anus or vagina, the first sensation is one of pressure, an alien intrusion into the most private and vulnerable parts of your being. It is not yet pain, but a cold, strange invasion, a violation that sends a jolt of fear through your entire body. Your muscles tense, your body tries to close, to contract, to resist the unwelcome intrusion. But the stake keeps advancing, millimeter by agonizing millimeter, pushed forward by the relentless force of the executioner. It does not cut, it does not tear. Instead, it separates, slowly, agonizingly, separating each layer of tissue, each bundle of muscle, each nerve ending. There are no large tears, no gushing torrents of blood, just a heavy, compressed, burning sensation deep inside your body. As the stake penetrates deeper, through the rectum, the uterus, the bladder, the nerve endings begin to ignite, sending jolts of searing pain throughout your nervous system. The person being executed starts to convulse uncontrollably, moaning without words, their body racked with spasms of agony. They feel every vibration of the stake, every slight tremor of the executioner's hand. Each time the executioner taps lightly on the bottom end of the stake, forcing it further into their body, they feel it like a thunderclap, reverberating through their entire being. Then, when the stake reaches the chest area, the pain becomes unbearable, a searing, all-consuming inferno that threatens to overwhelm your consciousness. This is where a multitude of nerves, blood vessels, and vital organs are concentrated, making the sensation of penetration exponentially more agonizing. At this point, pain is no longer something you feel. It is something that takes over your entire consciousness, obliterating all other sensations and thoughts. You no longer know who you are, where you are, or what is happening to you. You are simply a trembling mass of flesh impaled on a wooden axis, your entire being consumed by an unrelenting, all-encompassing agony. When the body is erected, hoisted into the air, the victim is no longer lying down, no longer supported by the ground. They float, suspended in midair, hung by the very stake that is piercing through them, their weight pulling down with relentless force. At that moment, their own weight becomes the most cruel weapon, driving the stake deeper into their body with each agonizing breath. Every movement, every slight tremor, every time the wind makes the body sway, the stake drives further, faster than the executioner's hand could ever manage. The executed often lose all control of their bodily functions. They wet themselves, vomit, convulse, and moan with sounds that are no longer human, sounds of pure, unadulterated agony. If the stake happens to strike a vital organ, death can come relatively quickly, in a matter of minutes. But if the executioner is skilled, or simply lucky, they will avoid the liver, the lungs, the heart, and the kidneys, prolonging the victim's suffering for days. 3 days. Imagine enduring 3 days in a state of neither lying down, nor sitting, nor moving, only one single agonizing posture, being impaled. Hour by hour, consciousness gradually recedes from the brain, fading in and out like a dying ember. Hallucinations appear, shimmering visions that offer fleeting moments of respite from the unrelenting pain. Some see angels, their wings shimmering with ethereal light. Others see fire, burning inside their eyes, consuming them from within. Still others imagine that they are returning home, being held in their mother's arms, surrounded by love and comfort. But then, inevitably, they snap back to reality, jolted back to consciousness by a spasm in their intestines, a surge of pain that reminds them of their agonizing predicament. Some say nothing. They are completely silent, their spirits broken, their hope extinguished. They do not beg, they do not scream. They simply stare blankly at the passers-by, their eyes no longer asking for salvation, but for release, for the sweet oblivion of death. And the people who pass by, witnessing this gruesome spectacle, they also die a little inside when they see those eyes, those vacant, pleading eyes that reflect the utter despair of the human condition. Death does not come from a single stab, a single blow. It comes hour by hour, slice by slice, breath by breath. Some die from neurological shock, their nervous systems unable to withstand the overwhelming level of pain, collapsing under the strain. Some die from infection, as bacteria from the stake enter directly into the bloodstream, poisoning their bodies from within. Many die from dehydration, from starvation, from the scorching heat of the sun, or from the bitter cold of the night. But most die from simply giving up. They no longer want to live, no longer have the strength to endure the unrelenting agony. They withdraw from themselves, like a person pulling their soul out of a pained and broken body. And then, quietly, they disappear, slipping away into the darkness, leaving behind only a lifeless husk impaled on a stake for all to see. Why do we need to know this? Why delve into these horrific details instead of stopping at the sanitized surface layer of history? Because this is the true nature of impalement. It is not just a method of execution, a way to dispose of criminals or enemies. It is a sermon written in blood, an ancient ritual where the human body itself becomes the text upon which power inscribes itself. Vlad understood this better than anyone. He did not impale to destroy one person. He impaled to leave a mark on the mind of an entire nation, to carve a warning not just into the body, but into the collective memory. And he succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. Hundreds of years later, simply mentioning the name Vlad the Impaler requires no further explanation. The image that immediately springs to mind is one of blood, of pain, of stakes standing erect like the skeletal fingers of death.
Not because he killed more people than anyone else, but because he killed in a way that no one else dared to imagine, creating a spectacle of horror that continues to haunt the human psyche to this day. Today, the punishment of impalement may have disappeared from the formal judicial systems of the world, relegated to the dark corners of history. But its memory remains, etched into history books, immortalized in films, whispered in legends, and, most frightening of all, deeply ingrained in the psychology of those who crave power. Because the idea of turning pain into a tool of control, of using fear to manipulate and dominate others, has never truly died. It only changes its form, adapting to the changing times, hiding behind more civilized-sounding words: deterrence, just punishment, strong psychological impact. But if we look deep enough, past the euphemisms and the justifications, we can still see the stake, looming in the shadows. A constant reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty. Thank you for making it to the end of this disturbing journey. We will see you again in the next story, where history is not just learned, but felt.